I'll just maybe say some initial thoughts on the elections, particularly in terms of the interest of the working class and what this election means. Of course, I mean, this in a sense has been a kind of a historical election for us, because it has helped us break from the traditional ruling elite, if I may put it that way. We have been ruled since independence. We have been ruled by families, the Bandaranayakas, the Rajapaksas. So we have been ruled by this certain class of elites since independence. And Anura Kumara Dissanayake was not part of that ruling elite. So in a sense, his victory kind of marks a break from that kind of class politics or that kind of elite politics which we had in Sri Lanka. But what is interesting is that, yes, what is interesting is that the international media has been, has been framing Anura Kumara Dissanayake as a Marxist. And we see all these international articles saying the Marxists has won election. But on the ground, the National People's Power, the NPP, which is the new face of the JVP, they've always tried to remove that Marxist or self-proclaimed Marxist history of theirs. So they've always tried to clean themselves of this we are left image, and they have always portrayed themselves as this center party, not even center left, I would say, but center party, forming close ties with the business class. By and large, the business class and their majority voter base is, of course, the middle class, but forming close ties with the business class to appear, quote unquote, not radical. So that is what's happening on the ground. But the international media, of course, portrays himself or portrays Anura Kumara Dissanayake as a Marxist who has come to power. So it's a bit confusing for us on the ground, because he's not a Marxist. None of his politics are has anything, like, it does not even have the semblance of class consciousness in it. It's about attracting middle class votes. It's about gaining the support of the business community, which has traditionally opposed JVP, and so on. So while people like me, who also put forward a presidential candidate and contested, while people like me, we welcome that breakaway from the traditional ruling elite and so on. Of course, we welcome that break, because that is a good thing for Sri Lankan politics. We are also not enthusiastic about the politics which the NPP has proposed while they came to power, and how they came to power. So that's one thing. That's one specific thing. And very recently, when we were analyzing the electoral map of the NPP, it is also by and large a singular vote which got the NPP to power. If you look at the electoral map, the northeast of the country, which has the Tamil minority population of the country and the Muslim population of the country, then of course the plantation or the upcountry or the hill country of the hill central province of the country, which has the plantation workers, the Malaya Tamil communities, and so on. So basically the minorities, areas where there is concentration of minorities, Anura Kumara Dissanayake did not win. In fact, his opposing candidate won in these regions. So that is also an indication of how on what a road map of, or an electoral map of how different ethnicities voted in these elections. So that is another point which I want to mark in terms of the new government which has come into power. They did get substantial, or they did get a increased amount of vote from the areas where there is a concentration of minority populations when we compare to 2019 election. But they still did not win in these areas. They, by and large, won from a southern singular vote bank, I would say. So that is also another interesting aspect of these elections. And the third interesting aspect, which I always found it to be the politics of the NPP, this is one of my primary critiques, is that I feel that they use the working class vote base, just like a capitalist, like a traditional capitalist party. They campaign with the working class to get middle class politics to power. or to get the elite politics to power. And that has been my critique of all the capitalist. That is how capitalist parties do politics. They get the vote of the working class in order to put certain interests to power and so on. So that has been my critique of the NPP also, that they use the working class vote to get certain points in the middle class politics to power. And that has been my critique of the NPP. And I don't think this election has changed my mind on how they have perceived the voter base, or how they have approached the voter base and so on. So when they have a meeting in the free trade zones, for instance, they say one thing, but when they have a meeting with the business community, they say something else. So this also we observed right throughout the electoral process. So that is why I always keep questioning how the international media portrays Anura Kumara Dissanayake as a Marxist president, when within the country he has not been doing class politics as such for him to be called a Marxist. So that's also another interesting aspect of this election which I want to park. And the fourth interesting aspect is the fact that, as Danusha was saying, they have not really challenged the IMF. In fact, they have only said that they would negotiate with. They have not even used the word renegotiate. They have only said, or actually relook at what the IMF has been doing in terms of conditionalities, in terms of how they are negotiating the debt for us. So even yesterday, it looks as if the NPP is going to go ahead with what was negotiated by the previous president in terms of debt negotiation. So that negotiated deal is terrible for the people of this country. It's going to be catastrophic for the ordinary people of this country, because the entire burden of the debt is going to fall on the working people. So if the NPP is going to go ahead with the negotiated deal of the previous government, then what they're saying is that the burden of that debt negotiation, or the burden of that renegotiated debt, is going to fall on the working people of the country. So that also we are observing, and of course we are not saying anything. We are not, because the wave is still with the NPP. People are very excited about the NPP. They're doing a few things, like, for instance, just one day after he came to power, Anura Kumara Dissanayake asked the old staff of the previous president to return their vehicles. Then they came and parked their vehicles in Golf's Green, and then it became a spectacle. So there are many spectacles which are happening when it comes to the NPP on the ground, and I think people are distracted by these spectacles. But that is the wave right now. So whatever we say, it's not being taken. For instance, we're warning about how the debt negotiation process is going. People are not listening. We're warning about the fact that NPP has a history of singular Buddhist majoritarian ideology. People are not listening. But we want to park all of these concerns. So when the politics does turn, when the people do realize that, maybe NPP is not that progressive, radical turn from the old politics as they thought they were, then we would be in a position to speak to people about why we had concerns with the NPP in the first place. So it's always good to park that politics and or to raise those concerns even now and keep it for a future date. Now is not the time, because people are enamored by this new president. So this wave is still going with the NPP, but we say these things so that we park those opinions, so that for a future date we can use them. So that's the fourth thing which I wanted to highlight. And the fifth thing, of course, is that parliament elections are coming in November, early November. So NPP is also, like how the previous government did, NPP is also doing many popular things. For instance, they have appointed a female prime minister, or they have appointed a female person as a woman as a prime minister. And that is, I would say, a significant step. Whether they did it for elections or not is another question, but it's a significant step in terms of Sri Lankan politics and Sri Lankan left politics. Because within Sri Lankan left politics, women still have a huge uphill task in terms of getting their place in Sri Lankan left politics, and women are still struggling for it. So when a woman gets appointed, whether it was done for electoral gains or not, it's still a significant political move by the NPP government. And I, of course, really welcomed the move that they have appointed Dr. Harini Amarasuriya as the Prime Minister of the country. Of course, she's the interim Prime Minister, but still, I would think it's a significant move when it comes to that party, but also when it comes to Sri Lankan politics. Then, of course, they're doing various popular things like, appointing persons who have a clean record, uncorrupted record when it comes to certain political positions like governors in the country. So they are appointing people who don't have this past baggage of corruption with them. So all of this is happening, which looks like good things, or which looks like these political events which are happening in this country. But whether this would be sustained and whether this would remain post-parliamentary election, or whether they are just doing this to gain votes from the middle class during the parliamentary election, is something which we have to wait and see after November. So we're all waiting for that. My party is also contesting for the parliamentary election. We want a strong opposition. We want a left opposition in parliament. So we are hoping that some of our members will also go to parliament, but it's very hard because the wave is still with the NPP. But of course, our politics is not, parliamentary elections is only part of our politics. Our politics is always with the struggle, it's always with the workers. We are very concerned about, Danusha spoke about how workers are, or the wages, or the wages of the workers are going to become really cheap for international capital to exploit. That is still very much a concern for us, because next year labor law reforms are going to, if they follow the IMF trajectory, labor law reforms are going to come, privatization is going to come, debt negotiation, I mentioned this before, that is going to come. So many things which the IMF already did with the previous government is going to come next year. So there needs to be a voice on the ground fighting against these conditionalities on behalf of the people. And I hope, we are always on the ground. In the government sector, which is where the privatization is going to hit very strongly, in the government sector, we have a relatively strong union base. But I would not say that the union base is a radical union base fighting for the rights of all working class and so on. In my opinion, they have been quite self-serving, coming in only when it comes to wages, salaries, and so on. So even the anti-privatization struggle in, for instance, the Ceylon Electricity Board, when IMF is pushing to privatize the Ceylon Electricity Board, the struggle with the unions were very weak. They were going and meeting politicians, trying to negotiate and so on. But here the IMF is coming like a big wave, and then the struggle of the unions was, almost non-existent, I would say. There were strikes here and there, but it was very weak. So what I think the unions will do, the public sector unions, not the private sector. Private sector unions are waging various other struggles. Like, for instance, under the IMF conditionality, they restructured the pension funds. Only in Sri Lanka this has happened. So we are waging other different struggles. But from the public sector unions, the privatization struggle, I do not see it, swelling up under this government. Rather, I think what they would try to do is they would try and negotiate or try to put pressure on the new government to not privatize institutions. For unions to go on the streets and take up a massive campaign against privatization, it would take a lot of time. I think there's a lot of bureaucracy and a lot of political divisions inside unions. But I think it will take some time for the unions to go on the streets and put forward an effective resistance, effective political resistance or street resistance against what the new government is going to do. Unless, of course, the unions attached to the major political parties, like, for instance, the existing government which left, or the existing president who was unseated, his party also has a union. And there are similar political parties, traditional capitalist parties also have union bases with them. So unless they put forward a resistance to kind of, not really against privatization, but to disrupt the current government's, whatever the current government is doing for the sake of disrupting, unless that happens, I don't see the unions getting onto the streets and fighting against privatization anytime soon. It might happen maybe from 6 months' time and so on, unless, of course, the unions attached to the major political parties show their opposition to the new government by getting the workers to do a token strike or so on. So I don't see public sector unions, actually struggling for the common good of the people or the common good of workers anytime soon. But we have to wait and see. So that's in terms of unions in relation to, or public sector unions in relation to the new government. In terms of the other left political parties, myself and Danusha, we were part of a party called Alliance called the People's Struggle Alliance. And this People's Struggle Alliance was a combination of three left parties, the Frontline Socialist Party, the New Democratic Marxist Leninist Party, which has a has its base in the minority regions of the country. And the Socialist People's Forum, which consists it's a small party which consists of trade union leaders, intellectuals, left thinkers, and so on. So these three parties got together with new faces which emerged from the Aragalia, the people's struggle. We formed an alliance. Of course, we got we got around 11,000 odd votes, so it was a negligible amount of votes. But the program we put forward was we need to exit from the current IMF agreement. We need to find a permanent solution. These are the main themes of our campaign. Of course, I mean, we put forward a political program, like quite a detailed political program. But the main slogans were, one, we need to exit out of this current IMF agreement because it's detrimental to the people. We need to stop negotiating with the debtors the way we are currently, creditors with the way we are currently negotiating. And instead, we have to form a third world alliance with other states which are negotiating with creditors and put forward a common demand to renegotiate our debt, which would put us in a much stronger position than what we are in right now. That's in terms of debt negotiation, which we have already started doing with other trade unions and so on, other trade unions and organizations and so on. And in terms of the ethnic question, the national question, which has been plaguing our country, which has been dividing the working class since independence, we said if we want to build a united working class, we need to come up with a solid solution to the national question. And then we put forward our solution to the national question, which is plaguing Sri Lanka, because otherwise we won't be able to build a united working class. And of course, we took a position against the very obvious encroachment of India and the United States into the politics of Sri Lanka. The India, of course, physically it's present. They are taking over lands in the north and the east. I mean, you can see it being physically present on the ground. The United States, of course, is intervening through the IMF by structurally changing the political and economic landscape of Sri Lanka. For instance, the IMF is proposing something called the governance diagnostic, where they have proposed that our central bank must be independent. But what they mean by independent is that the central bank must be independent from being accountable to the people, but working in favor of finance, capital, and so on. So these are the main kind of political slogans we took. And of course, we took up issues which directly impact people. For instance, the taxation, indirect taxation, which were affecting people, the electricity issue, which has directly affected people, and so on. So this was our campaign, but obviously, people were voting for one of the two main candidates whom they thought was going to be the election. So we did not gain traction in terms of vote, but we gained traction in terms of audience, where people were coming and listening to people were receptive to what we were saying, and they were becoming more critical of the new president or new party which is coming to power. In terms of our relationship with the left party, the position which we have taken is that if they put forward a people friendly agenda, for instance, if they're going to reduce taxation, particularly indirect taxation, so that the ordinary people, the food costs would go down and so on, then obviously we would support that. If they're going to completely reverse the Central Bank Act which has passed, which is making the central bank unaccountable to the people, of course we would support that. But if they're going to go ahead with the current debt negotiated by the previous president, if they're going to pass, for instance, the anti-terror legislation which was proposed by the previous government, if they're going to pass, for instance, if they're going to keep the pension restructuring as it is, and if they're going to pass, for instance, I don't know if they're going to go, as I said, if they're going to go ahead with the current negotiated debt program of the government, then of course we have to oppose it, and we would oppose it on the ground as we have always done. So we are leaving that space for the new government to take the side of the working people, which they should be doing, because the problem with all of these governments was they were completely serving the interests of a particular very, very minority bourgeoisie class in Sri Lanka. So we're waiting for the government to take a progressive position towards the people, because the people voted for them, even though it was not a majority. But if they don't do that, then of course we are going to, as we are doing now, we are going to be taking a strong position against the government if they're not going to be working and negotiating on behalf of the people. So that's a position which we have taken in terms of relationship to the party. In terms of the new government's relationship to Gaza and the genocide which is happening in Gaza, It's very interesting because the NPP we have a Sri Lankan Palestinian Solidarity Group in which some of the central committee members of the JVP, the Janata Vimukti Peramuna, which is the main, or the only party in the National People's Party, the constituent party in the NPP. So some of the main members were part of this Sri Lankan Palestinian Solidarity Group. But throughout the election campaign, we did not see, we took up a pro-Palestinian stand. We took a very, very strong pro-Palestine stand on behalf of the Palestinian people, completely opposed the genocide and so on. But I didn't see the NPP doing that, interestingly. I didn't see them taking a position on the United States aggression against United States support to Israel with regards to the genocide on Palestine. So I did not see their main members. Of course, some of the supporters put out posts and so on, but I did not see the party itself taking a strong position, despite the fact that they are part of the Sri Lankan Palestinian Palestinian Solidarity Group or something like that. So I did not see the party taking an official stand on the genocide which is happening in Palestine right now. So that's on the Palestinian question. In terms of China, when the previous government, I think it's called the Official Committee of Creditors, Ranil Wickremesinghe, the previous president, just before the election, he got into a negotiated deal with the Official Committee of Creditors, which also includes the China Exim Bank. So they got into a negotiated agreement on how this debt is going to be restructured. And what we are told, we have not seen in documents, but what we are told is that 4.5% of the GDP is going to be allocated for debt servicing. Very summary, that was the negotiated agreement. So China is also part of this negotiated agreement. So whether this new government will now, when they try to renegotiate, will they now start talking to bilateral creditors individually, which I think would be favorable to us? Or if they are now, what they have indicated is that they're going to go ahead with this negotiated deal of the previous government. Then, of course, it's not China or India. It's just that the agreement, they're going ahead with the agreement and so on. So the new government has not shown on which side they are going to tilt towards, whether they're going to tilt towards China or India, or whether they're going to, move closer to the US. We don't really know. It's too early to tell as well. But one thing we do know is China was part of this this negotiated agreement, or this informal negotiated agreement, which was entered into by the previous government. And this government has said that they are going to go ahead with that. The Sri Lankan parties, whether the main three political parties, when they speak of India, they don't mean the working population. They mean the state interest of multinational like the Adanis and the Ambanis. So they don't really mean the working people, but that's a real opportunity for instance, people like us to forge ties with India in terms of class struggle and in terms of what workers are pushing for in India and so on. And I think Ian had texted and said this is the same thing which happened in Sri Lanka in terms of the farmers. But when it happens in India, it just sweeps over in terms of gender rights and so on. So this is where we are also trying to form linkages, not only with the PSA, but all of us are part of unions. Dhanush and myself we also part of a union. So this is where we are trying to form linkages, even for things like debt renegotiation and so on, where the governments are looking into negotiating individually with creditors and so on. They think that they're going to end the crisis by doing that, but we see it differently. We see it from the point of view of working people, where we can actually forge ties between other countries which are in debt distress and with people who are being imposed these austerities and the burden of debt even in other countries. So this is something which we have to learn from, but this is also something which we have to connect, which I think we also have been struggling in terms of how to sustainably connect with other movements in other countries, particularly with India and so on. So that's one thing. In terms of JVP's nationalist politics, I think comrades asked questions about that. And I think there was this question about whether there is a split inside the JVP, whether parts of the JVP have become, they have moved away from their nationalist, single nationalist origins and so on. I don't think so. I think the base is still very much singular majoritarian. Within the new phase of the JVP, there is a kind of a liberal attempt to portray the JVP as not racist or not single a nationalist. But what we saw during the elections is this nationalist face of the new party also coming out. When they get a critique from the South, saying that they are questioning the state and religion nexus, the Sinhala Buddhist state, or the Buddhist religion and the state, the nexus, and which has actually resulted in this 30-year-long conflict, which ended with the genocide. So when critique come from the South, the JVP is immediately willing to put on that Sinhala Buddhist cloak and show itself as this party of the majoritarian community. So I don't think there is a major shift in ideology, whether it be about the state or whether it be about the class interest. I don't think there is a major shift. Or class interest, of course, initially the JVP was waging what they would term as a struggle of the oppressed. I don't know whether it was you can term it as a class struggle, but it was definitely a struggle of the oppressed. But now they have come a long way and they want to completely remove themselves from the history. They have apologized several times to business meetings where they have said that they are deeply sorry about the killings and so on. Of course, they have to apologize for the killings of ordinary civilians and so on. But the way they are doing it is like we are ashamed of our past kind of thing, which is problematic also. So I don't think there is a shift from representing the oppressed, representing the marginalized. There's a shift from that for sure. But I don't see a big shift in terms of their nationalistic, single majoritarian nationalist politics, which of course now we don't see that, because now they are like good for everyone. They are good for everyone right now because there is a parliamentary election coming, but we have to see after the parliamentary election where they stand. Again, people put their hopes in elections. I mean, that's how people do politics, by and large, do politics in Sri Lanka. One of the comrades asked a question about unions and why unions are not taking a principal stand. This, for the last, I don't know, since I have been active in union movements, this is what I have seen, where unions always try to take a shortcut. They don't want to do the hard work of mobilizing people on the ground. Private sector unions have a different problem altogether. Unions have been completely broken down. Less than 5% of the workers in the private sector actually unionized. So we have other struggles also. But the state sector, the unions are very comfortable with their salaries and their pay. So even when austerity is coming, till the last moment, their strategy is to negotiate with capitalist party, unfortunately. So that is the state of the Sri Lankan union movement. But we are trying to change. For instance, when the pension struggle was happening, we really tried to change that, and we tried to mobilize struggle on the ground. It's a long process, but we are trying to revive the union culture, revive the union culture which stood on the side of the working people and not just for salaries and perks and benefits and so on. We are trying to do that, but we are trying to reverse a 30-40 year long history where unions were gradually weakened, and then they were made arms of bourgeoisie party. So it's a long process, but we are trying to challenge that system and change it also. So that's just on the union side. It's a new political, what I would like to say as a concluding terrain is or rather concluding remark, it's like a new political terrain which we're having right now in Sri Lanka, where a new party which has never been in power before has come to power, or a new president from a party which has never been in power has come to power. And it looks like in the parliamentary election also they would get, they might not get the 2/3 majority they need in parliament, but they would get enough to perhaps make a government maybe, or at least a minority government. So within that space, there are many areas which are loosening up. For instance, the nexus between, for instance, traditional capitalist class or traditional capitalist individuals and traditional capitalist parties. So those connections are kind of loosening up. And we as a party representing the working people, but not only as party, but as unions, as movements, we have to find those spaces in those loose connections and try to revive that spirit, that revolutionary spirit which people had in 2022. So I think that is the role of the left right now in Sri Lanka. That is what we are trying to do.